Okay, so this one I think like led to its creation and its demise at the same time. Like it needed it to start, but it also brought about its demise in a way. But I think that classism was kind of important to the industrial age, and that condition of, people being in charge and having a bunch of little, basically, like worker drones that they would boss around to do things. And that is a very efficient model. So I think that that classism of one person in charge commanding all these other people was really, really important for the industrial age.
Okay, so you're saying that having classes contributed to it. Does anyone disagree with DJ? Because that one's definitely a unique one. I haven't really considered that one before. Aaron, what do you think?
Well, I would just want DJ to elaborate a little bit more on what he's saying, because I'm trying to consider it as well. So, can you explain, DJ, why having classes is something that was necessary and couldn't have been accomplished through other means?
Okay, go ahead, DJ, and maybe give us a little bit more on that.
Yeah, okay, so it's kind of the way in like how we have a representative democracy instead of a straight democracy, because over a wide variety of people, a wide geographic space, you can't have all these people working together. You have to have some sort of centralized power kind of working and shaping what everybody else does, so that you have these few people at the top that are managing everything and everyone at the bottom who is actually doing the work.
Fascinating. Okay, so I think what you're getting at here, maybe let me say it in a different way, and DJ, tell me if you agree. What we needed was, in a word, capitalism, but let me explain what I mean by that, is we needed those with capital to be able to make the large investments into industrialization. So you had to have people with greater wealth, right, and enough wealth to make those large investments, and to take those big risks and to make those big plans, without which, if we had gone into maybe if we had like proceeded out of the nomadic age, where roughly everyone was equal, other than maybe a tribal leader, you know what I mean, you probably wouldn't have had the wealth or accumulation of wealth in order to make that leap. Huh, that's fascinating. I find that really, really fascinating. Good thought there, DJ. Let's hear from some more of you. Jonah, go ahead.
So if I understood you right, DJ, you're saying that like one person in charge creates like a focused end goal, and that could be good. It probably was good for increased complexity, but it also could have been bad because their goal could have been like personal gain or something like that would not have helped complexity.
Yeah, I could go. It can actually probably diminish it as well if it goes too far. So there's kind of enough of these people, a large enough kind of upper middle class, if you will, or a large enough higher class, if you will. There's enough of them, not just a few, to where you can have the diversity, have the competition between them. I really think you're onto something there. I think, DJ, probably the way I would go is maybe not come at it from economic classes, although that's part of the equation. It really is capitalism. Those with capital, were able to make those large investments. So that really is fascinating. Aaron, let's hear from you.
Well, just something a couple people have mentioned about like economic coordination and the self-interest in capitalism. And the people have been talking about that sort of thing as bad, and I agree. If it's taken too far, it definitely can be. But something that I think people have to keep in mind is that nobody's coming up with new ideas. Well, very few people are coming up with new ideas just to benefit humanity as a whole. Most people are coming up with these ideas to benefit themselves. And that's how collective learning always kind of works. It's then through trade. It's then through just trading ideas for each individual's own benefit. And then it ends up helping all of humanity. But the majority of these people coming up with new ideas are not doing it for some abstract idea of the greater good.
Yeah, definitely. And that sort of competitive side, is what propels the invisible hand, according to Adam Smith. Good stuff. Good stuff, guys. Okay, what else? What other ingredients and or conditions do you feel led to the industrial age? So Daria is contributing here. She's saying, new energy resources. which is also what helps lead to the larger modern revolution, but for sure new energy resources. So that's another one. That's another big one for sure. What else do we need? Oh, don't move these. What else should be on this list? Any other ingredients? What about what we talked about on Monday? We talked a little bit about liberalism, right? But what about widespread education? And would you consider that an ingredient or a condition? I know there's some overlap, but what is it primarily? Tanner, what do you think?
I don't know. A lot of these, like I said, could probably be construed either or. I mean, a lot of ingredients are conditions, and a lot of conditions are ingredients. Although, yeah, I mean, pretty much all conditions are ingredients. It's not necessarily mutually exclusive, but for our purposes, I'd say it sounds more like an ingredient to me, honestly. But yeah.
Okay, cool.
That's probably based on random whim. So.
Yeah, well, I would probably put it under ingredients as well. Whereas liberalism, liberal governance is more condition. Widespread education, which doesn't really, we shouldn't even call it widespread education because it's not quite widespread education. It's not until after the Industrial Revolution that really gets going. But it is more, a greater amount of it. So how would I describe that? It's like increased education, increased, something like that, education. Let's see here. Sorry. Increased education / learning. Yeah. Yeah, and greater accessibility to that education. Yeah, exactly, Shannon. Aaron, any other thoughts?
Well, I was thinking that one big thing that we don't have on here quite yet is trade, and how we have these global trade networks that were starting to be built up to exchange goods from one side of the earth to the other. And that really helped spread ideas first up, but it also helped create demands for various things, which increased the industrialization of those things.
Yeah. So new markets. Yeah, new markets / increased wealth. So you can actually sell to those markets. Yeah, okay. Mitchell, what do you think?
Okay, so I guess this kind of goes into the increased variety of staple foods and whatever, and how there was just more and easily available food. But a higher population also probably really helped the industrial age because there was a lot of labor needed in order to put all this stuff into action.
Yeah, fantastic one. And that kind of goes along with the increased variety of staple foods, and we'll put here equaling increased population. Yeah, and that's a huge factor, is because of that. I mean, just looking at Britain alone, if you study British history, you'll find that increased populations made it so there was just a lot of people looking for other work. B, there was this middle class, upper middle class, that started to buy up small family farms and started to kind of consolidate those farms all into one. And so basically just booting people from the properties that they bought, from that they were purchasing. So a lot of families were sort of displaced at the same time. So it created a lot of cheap labor, a lot of ability for factory owners to hire a lot of people at a cheap wage and get them in and try their new experiment. So good stuff. Okay, all of this is really useful and helpful. Last one that I want to get at real fast here. Why were the Europeans able to colonize so much of the world? Let's just sum that up. It's fairly self-explanatory, but superior military power, right? There's a window of history here where the Europeans are just vastly more advanced than any other population on the planet, and they dominate the world for a good 300, 400 years, and do very well. And they kind of get the momentum going behind them with that greater military might, and so it just kind of dominoes into greater and greater and greater and greater military might. And like I said, it's a good 300-400 year period where Europe tends to just dominate the world, colonize the world, gets more resources because of that. Mercantilism, which is sort of a stepping stone between feudalism, an earlier form of economics, and capitalism. Mercantilism is sort of like capitalism for king and country. So you go out and conquer lands and bring in resources for king and country, not for your business. You know what I mean? Anyway, so all of that kind of gets going during this time period, and they just are vastly superior to most of the rest of the world and are able to dominate most of the rest of the world until the tables begin to turn, frankly, mostly in the 1900s, a little bit in the 1800s. But in the early 1900s, tables turn, and local populations get access to many of the same, or enough of the same military might, enough weapons and so forth to ward off their colonizers and take back their countries. Tanner, go ahead.
I think I'm always curious about, I don't know, perhaps it could be attributable to some extent to America's maybe, shall we say, need to have noble intentions when it comes to war or invading. But I don't know, I'm kind of curious as to why we didn't colonize more of the world, I suppose. I don't know.
Why the U.S. didn't?
We got the Philippines, and a few islands, but that's pretty much the extent of it.
Yeah. And a lot of people are surprised to even know that the United States really took over the Philippines. A lot of people don't understand that history. And Philippines, many people in the Philippines have not loved the United States because of it. And more recently, just in the last few weeks, their president has signed new agreements with China and really walked away from relationships with the United States. So they're still kind of throwing us off in a way. Yeah. Now we have been rather brutal there. So that is fascinating to look at, but why not more? Well, a big part of that was the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine said to the world, you stay out of our area of the world, and we'll stay out of yours. And we followed that doctrine from President Monroe all the way up to really President Wilson. And then by the time President Wilson comes along, the world is already changing and moving away from colonialization. So do we have a few? Yeah, we have like Guam, Puerto Rico. And these are parts of our country that don't have, or peoples within our country that don't have equal status with Americans. It's weird. Puerto Ricans, people from Guam, I think there's a Tongan U.S. island. Anyway, and these countries just simply don't have equal status, and so they're kind of in this weird place where they're not full-fledged separate nations, but they're not states of the United States either. And so, yeah, anyway, we do have a few of those, but they're much less than many of other countries have had, or many Western European countries had anyway.